The wind moaned through the crumbling towers of Wolfveil Keep, a sound like a wounded beast crying out for mercy. Tavren Wolfveil stood motionless atop the battlements, the pale moon carving silver along his scarred face and hair. At 58, his frame still carried the coiled power of the alpha he once ruled, as though the years had carved deep lines around eyes that had seen far too much blood. He drew in a sharp breath. Something foreign rode the cold air, not deer, not mountain lion, human, gunpowder, silver, and beneath it, hatred. Hunters. 2 decades of solitude hadn't dulled his senses. It had honed them into blades. They would find no easy prey here, no trembling beast awaiting mercy. Tavren melted into the dark corridors of his ancestral fortress, the echo of his boots swallowed by stone walls 3 feet thick. Walls that had endured wars, quakes, and time itself. They would endure this night too. The first hunter broke from the tree-line night vision goggles bright in Tavren's lupine sight. 5 more shadows followed, moving with the sharp rhythm of men who had hunted his kind before. "We know you're in there," Wolfveil the leader shouted, the last monster of a cursed line. "Your time is done." Tavren stayed silent, watching their cautious advance. They weren't amateurs. They knew what an alpha could do, even an aging one. He withdrew deeper into the keep. Let them come. The fortress had been his obsession, its halls turned into traps for those arrogant enough to chase monsters. The first man stepped on a pressure plate. A storm of silver-tipped spears burst through the entryway. His scream tore the stillness, a grim warning to the rest. The survivors slowed alert now. Tavren stalked them through hidden passages carved centuries ago, paths known only to those of the Wolfveil bloodline. Not strength, but cunning. Not fury, but patience. These were the weapons of an alpha, who had endured when every kin of his had fallen. The second hunter crashed into a pit lined with burning mountain ash. The third met Tavren in a narrow corridor where guns meant nothing. Claws split from human hands, and the fight ended in a heartbeat. "You hunt what you don't understand," Tavren rasped to the dying man. "I'm not the monster that haunts these mountains." 3 remained moving shoulder to shoulder into the grand hall. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, falling across ancient tapestries. The tale of the Wolfveil bloodline, power, nobility, ruin, and curse. Tavren stood above them on the gallery, ready to finish it, until a faint scent struck him like lightning. Omega. Unfamiliar yet strangely ancient. Someone was coming, then chaos movement at the entrance. A figure stumbled through the doorway, clutching her side, blood streaking her torn dress. Even from above, Tavren saw she was young, mid-20s, dark hair, tangled and wet with crimson. "Another creature for the pyre," the lead hunter sneered, lifting his rifle. Tavren didn't think. He moved. He leapt from the gallery, the impact cracking old stone as dust rained from the ceiling. Amber light burned in his eyes, not the gold of youth, but the steady fire of a wolf who'd survived too long to die tonight. "Leave," he growled. The single word rolled through the hall like thunder, carrying the weight of dominance. Instinct clawed at the hunters, training 3 against 1. Yet none dared move. Something in his stance, unshakable, ancient, told them. Death stood before them. "It's over, Wolfveil." The leader hissed, signaling retreat. "Your kind's finished. The Lunara's order will see to that." Tavren didn't lower his guard until their scents faded into the night. Only then did he turn toward the young woman collapsed by the wall. Her scent filled the air now. Omega, yes, but layered with something older. Something he hadn't sensed since before the crimson veil cursed his blood. Something that whispered of fate. "Why have you come here?" Tavren asked. His tone edged with caution as he kept his distance. 20 years of silence had carved that habit into his bones. The woman lifted her head, revealing a face that might once have been beautiful if exhaustion and pain hadn't stolen its grace. "You're him, the Alpha of Wolfveil. They said you were dead." "I am Tavren," replied the words, tasting like rust and regret. You've come for nothing. She shook her head, wincing. No. You're the only one they still fear, the last who remembers the old ways. His resolve wavered for the first time in decades. No one had dared seek him since the night he'd been forced to kill his own brother Koran when the crimson veil took hold. The night he swore he'd never lead again, never risk the blood of those who followed him. What's your name? He asked, stepping closer to inspect the wound at her side. Silver poisoning, he muttered. They caught you before you reached the gate. Nira, she rasped. Nira Ashvale. The name meant nothing, yet it echoed faintly in his mind. Something from an old text, perhaps a forgotten entry in the records of the Lunaris Order. You won't make it till morning, Tavren said quietly. Before she could protest, he lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. The strength of an alpha didn't fade, it only slept. He carried her into a stone chamber deep within the fortress where old shelves held both medical tools and herbs known only to wolves. Working swiftly, he drew out the silver fragments and mixed a paste of wild sage and mountain resin to seal the wound. Through clenched teeth, Nira spoke. They're hunting us all. The council's branded the old bloodlines a threat, especially Omegas like me. Tavren's hands froze. The council was dissolved centuries ago. Not dissolved, she countered, her voice regaining strength. Reborn. They call themselves the New Moon Council now. They've merged modern tech with ancient rites, a dangerous mix. He finished binding her wound, the motions instinctive, drawn from the life he'd buried long ago. Why me? He asked at last. I've been gone from our world for 20 years. I am nothing to them. Nira tried to sit up, her voice trembling with defiance. You're the last of your line, Tavren. The final alpha who served on the old tribunal. The only one who knows how to fight them. He turned away, unwilling to let her see the shadow in his eyes. Memories surged that command honor, the respect his family once carried, before the curse twisted it all to ruin. I can't help you, he said flatly. The crimson veil ensures every Wolfveil alpha eventually loses control, becomes the beast the hunters whisper about. I chose isolation over slaughter. But you haven't lost control, Nira countered softly. You've lived alone for decades, and you're still you. He laughed without warmth. Only through discipline, meditation, isolation. One heartbeat of weakness, one true bond, and the beast wakes. He looked at her, amber flickering in his eyes. You're not safe here. No one is. She didn't flinch. That alone unsettled him. Most wolves looked away from an alpha's gaze. This Omega met it with quiet defiance, strength born not of rank, but spirit. They'll come back, she warned. More of them. Smarter. Armed with things even you can't prepare for. Let them, Tavren said. This fortress has seen worse. And when they're done with you, she shot back, they'll hunt every wolf who remembers the old ways. Every keeper of truth. Every Omega who still matters. Her words landed like claws across his chest. Legacy. Once the name Wolfveil had stood for justice, for balance among their kind, before power and curse turned it into something feared and forsaken. Rest, Tavren said finally. We'll talk when your strength returns. As he turned to leave, her voice came again, soft but certain. The full moon rises in 3 days. They'll come before then, Nira murmured. They know what the moonlight does to alphas like you. Tavren stopped at the doorway, shadows pooling around him. I'm not like the others, he said. Not anymore. No, she agreed softly. You're the last of your kind. The only question is, does that still matter to you? He didn't answer. Instead, Tavren climbed the long, cold stairs to the fortress's highest tower. The mountain wind, cut like glass, thin and merciless, but it cleared his thoughts. Dawn crept over the peaks, brushing the sky in pale gold. Another night survived, but her words echoed in him like an old wound reopening. Legacy. Once that word had meant everything. Now all it meant was survival, keeping the rage of the Crimson Veil locked behind iron discipline. One slip and the beast would devour what was left of him. As sunlight spilled into the valleys below, Tavren stood alone, watching the endless forest spread toward the horizon. For years it had been his sanctuary, until now. When he returned to Nira's chamber, he found her on her feet, moving slowly among the shelves that lined the ancient stone walls. She was examining an old leather-bound journal, fingers brushing over the faded crest of the Wolfveil bloodline. "You should be resting," Tavren said, noting her improved color. The herbs had already begun to knit her wound. "I've rested enough," she replied, her voice stronger. "You've kept everything. The records, the old laws, the teachings of the Lunari's order." He took the book from her hands, firm but gentle. "Knowledge that nearly destroyed us," he said. "Power that corrupts even the purest intent, or power that might save what's left of us." Nira countered. "You know what the New Moon Council is doing. They're erasing every trace of the old ways, every wolf who remembers balance, every Omega who could keep them in check." Tavren replaced the journal on its shelf, his movements deliberate. "And what would you have me do?" "Lead a rebellion. I ended that life the night I killed my brother Koren before the madness took him and me with it." "Then teach me." Nira said, her tone soft but sure. "Share what you know before it's gone. The rituals, the truth about alphas and omegas, the balance they fear." He studied her carefully. Most young wolves he'd known craved only dominance, status, or power. But she spoke with reverence for something older. Why, he asked bluntly, what could an Omega like you hope to gain from the very knowledge that damned us? Instead of answering, Nira rolled up her sleeve, revealing a mark burned into her wrist, a crescent moon pierced by 3 stars. Tavren's breath caught. He knew that sigil. He'd seen it only in the oldest records drawings of a bloodline believed extinct for centuries. "Moon Omega," he whispered. "I thought your kind vanished in the Great Purge." "Almost," she said. "My grandmother survived. She hid as human, even from her own family. Only when she was dying did she tell my mother who told me." He circled her slowly, reassessing everything, the calm defiance in her presence, her resilience despite silver poisoning, the scent that had stirred something ancient in him. "The hunters found you because of what you are," he murmured. "Not just an Omega, the Omega line, born to balance alpha blood, to stand against the curse itself. They've hunted my family for generations," she said. "When my grandmother died, the old bonds awakened. They sensed it, tracked my mother, then me. And you came here seeking protection," Tavren said. "No," Nira replied, her eyes blazing. "I came for an alpha who remembers the covenants. The purpose we were meant to serve, not conquest but balance. Strength with mercy." Before Tavren could answer, the low growl of engines rolled up from the valley. He moved to the narrow window, peering through the glass. Black SUVs climbed the winding road, silent, precise, disciplined. Not hunters this time. Something bigger. Something organized. "They've found us," Tavren muttered, amber light flaring in his eyes. "They found us sooner than I thought," Tavren said, grimly. Nira stepped up beside him at the narrow window. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted the convoy weaving through the trees. "Kael," she breathed. "That's him, the head of the New Moon Council. He almost never leaves their headquarters." "You know him?" Tavren asked, his tone cautious. "By reputation," she replied. "An alpha who believes wolves should rule openly, combining ancient power with modern technology to dominate. He's been wiping out every old bloodline that could stand against him." Tavren's gaze sharpened, studying the black vehicles snaking up the mountain. Every movement, every tactical position, every potential escape route, he measured them all. The fortress had withstood centuries of war, but never an assault armed with modern weapons. and guided by someone who understood their kind. We're leaving, Tavren decided. There are tunnels beneath the keep that lead deep into the mountains. We can lose them in the wilderness. Nira turned to him in disbelief. You're coming with me, he said, voice clipped. You wouldn't last an hour alone with them on your trail. And I have no intention of dying defending stone and ghosts. Moving with a speed that defied his age, Tavren gathered a few essentials. Medical packs, dried provisions, and several old journals bound in cracked leather. Knowledge too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. As they prepared to descend to the lower levels, a voice echoed through the courtyard, booming from a loudspeaker. Tavren Wolfveil. This is Kyle Stormfang of the North American Wolf Council. We know you're harboring an unregistered Omega. Surrender her and we'll let you keep your exile in peace. Tavren froze. The name hit him like a blade twisting under his ribs. Kyle Stormfang, he murmured. Nira caught the change in his scent, the sudden tightness in his stance. You know him. I knew a Kyle once, Tavren admitted, his voice rough. A boy I saved during the border wars. I trained him, raised him like my own. His eyes darkened, old memories clawing their way to the surface. Before the crimson veil began to stir, before I had to walk away from everyone I loved. Realization flickered in Nira's eyes. Your student, now your enemy. If it's truly him, Tavren said quietly, unwilling to believe it. It's been 25 years. The megaphone hissed again, Kyle's voice sharper now. 2 minutes, old man. Then we come in. We know how to handle your kind. The sound was deeper than Tavren remembered, commanding, hardened by power, but unmistakable. He could still hear the echo of the frightened child he had once lifted from the ruins of a burned village, covered in his parents' blood. The boy he had raised for 7 years. The son of his heart. It's him, Tavren whispered. And he knows every passage, every trap, every defense this fortress has. Nira touched his arm gently the first time she dared to. Then we need another way out. Tavren nodded, forcing the ghosts back into silence. Follow me. They descended narrow stairs, carved into the ancient stone. The air grew colder, damper. Generations of alphas had walked these halls, preparing for the day the outside world would come for them. That day had come. Behind them, the thunder of the assault began, the crash of the gates, the rhythmic advance of trained operatives sweeping through the fortress room by room. If Kyle was your student, Nira asked breathlessly as they ran, why would he turn on you? Why hunt the one who taught him honor? Tavren's jaw tightened. Because I left him. When the curse took hold, I felt the rage rising beyond my control. I vanished without a word to protect him, to protect everyone. He was 15, old enough to feel abandoned, too young to understand why. They emerged into a massive cavern beneath the mountain, its walls glistening with water. The underground river roared softly nearby, carrying mist into the air. The river flows underground, Tavren said. Follow it downstream. It surfaces 5 miles away, far from any road. You're not coming, Nira asked, panic breaking through her composure. He shook his head, eyes hardening. I'll follow, but first, I need to buy us time. He handed her the worn leather pack, his eyes steady and grave. Head east. Once you leave the tunnels, Tavren said, there's an old hunting cabin near Twin Peaks. I'll find you there. Nira hesitated, clutching the strap. They'll kill you, she whispered. A faint, tired smile tugged at his mouth. They'll try, he answered. But I still remember how to fight. And I know Kyle better than he knows himself. Be careful, she said softly, surprising him with the weight of her concern. The world still needs what you are. He watched her disappear into the black tunnels, her scent fading beneath the echo of rushing water. Only when he was sure she was gone did Tavren turn back toward the fortress above. It was time to face the past he'd spent 20 years avoiding. He waited in the grand hall, the heart of the Wolfveil legacy. Moonlight streamed through the tall arched windows, bathing the ancient stone in cold silver light. He stood tall and unhidden, choosing to face what was coming. The tactical team entered first, silent and disciplined, weapons raised. Their silver-tipped rifles gleamed as they surrounded him at a measured distance. Once the formation locked into place, Kyle Stormfang stepped forward. The years had reshaped the boy Tavren once knew into a man of power and control. Broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, his aura was all authority and quiet danger. The innocence Tavren remembered was gone, replaced by ambition and the weight of command. "Tavren Wolfveil," Kyle said, voice casual but edged. The great Alpha reduced to hiding in the ruins of his former glory. "Kyle Stormfang," Tavren replied evenly. "The orphan I raised now, hunting his own kind." For a moment, emotion flickered behind Kyle's eyes before hardening again. "Not hunting," he said. "Evolving, leading our species out of shadows, uniting wolves under strength, not superstition. By killing every bloodline that remembers balance," Tavren countered. "The safeguards that once kept our kind from becoming tyrants." Kale began circling him slowly, careful, calculating like a predator who remembered exactly what his prey could do. "The old ways kept us weak," Kyle said. "Scattered, hiding, denying what we are. I refuse to live as prey. The old ways kept us human," Tavren said, voice low but firm. "They kept the beast from devouring the man." Kyle laughed, a harsh, joyless sound. "Still preaching balance and restraint, old man. While you hid in your mountain temple, I built a world where wolves no longer kneel." "At the cost of your soul," Tavren murmured. "The Crimson Veil isn't unique to my bloodline, Kyle. It's what happens when an alpha lets power drown his humanity." Kyle's eyes flared with anger. "You dare speak of humanity? You who abandoned a 15-year-old boy without a word." His voice broke for a heartbeat before turning cold again. "You left me. You left everyone." The accusation hit hard, the old guilt twisting deep, but Tavren stood his ground. "I left to protect you," he said quietly. "When the rage took hold, when I couldn't control it, I chose exile rather than risk your life." For the briefest instant, uncertainty flashed across Kyle's face, then vanished. "A convenient excuse for cowardice," he said. "But it doesn't matter now." He raised his hand, signaling his men. "Where is she, Tavren?" "The last moon, Omega. My sources say she's here. She could change everything." "She's beyond your reach," Tavren answered calmly. "The moon Omegas were never meant to be weapons. Their gift was to balance the alphas, to keep monsters like you from rising." Kale's mouth curved into a thin, humorless smile. "Still lecturing, old teacher. But class is over." He gestured again. "Take him. We'll get what we need back at headquarters." The operatives advanced, confident, methodical, underestimating the old wolf. They didn't know that Tavren's years of exile hadn't been wasted. He had trained mind, body, and spirit until control itself became a weapon. When they moved, he struck, swift, silent, deadly. The first man's weapon twisted out of his grip. His own momentum sent him crashing into two others. The sound of silver clattered across the stone floor as the storm began. Silver bullets sliced through the air, slamming into the stone where Tavren had stood only moments before. Shards scattered like sparks. "Hold your fire," Kale shouted, knowing the risk of ricochets in such tight quarters. "Take him alive." But Tavren was already gone, moving like smoke between shadows. His strikes weren't meant to kill. They were meant to teach. A precise hit to the wrist, a twist at the shoulder, a sweep that sent another operative sprawling. Every motion carried the weight of centuries of discipline, Wolfveil training, born from generations who had mastered control over carnage. 4 men groaned on the floor before the rest cornered him, shock batons raised and humming with lethal voltage. Kyle stepped forward, respect flickering beneath his triumph. "Impressive, for a man your age. But you can't win." Tavren's breathing was steady, eyes calm. I wasn't trying to win, he said. Just to prove a point. Power without wisdom turns to chaos. Strength without restraint destroys itself. Kale sneered. Philosophy always philosophy. That's why your bloodline rotted, Tavren. While you thought, others acted. The world belongs to those who seize it. As his men closed in, Tavren shut his eyes for half a heartbeat, feeling the beast stir beneath his skin. The crimson veil whispered seductively, urging him to surrender, to tear them apart. But he refused. The same force that had damned his ancestors would not claim him. He turned the fury inward, shaping it, channeling alpha energy, not into destruction, but precision. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate as his will focused on the hall's weak points. A faint rumble rose. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling. Out Kyle barked as cracks spidered across the stone. Everyone out now. The first slabs crashed down like thunder. Amid the chaos, Tavren slipped behind a tapestry, disappearing into the hidden passage. He moved swiftly, but not in panic. Every exit mapped, every turn known. The secret tunnel wound through the heart of the mountain, leading toward the hunting cabin where Nira waited. Behind him, Kale's shouts echoed through the ruins, commanding his soldiers to regroup. The boy Tavren once mentored had become a leader, but one who'd forgotten balance, the truth that power without mercy becomes rot. As Tavren emerged into the cold breath of the mountain tunnels, the weight of 20 years pressed against him. He hadn't been ready for the sight of Kyle, the boy he'd loved as a son, now twisted by ambition. Perhaps that was why the Moon Omega had found him now. Not only for safety, but to remind him of what he'd buried: purpose. The path forward wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about preserving what still mattered. The knowledge, the harmony between man and wolf that once defined their kind. By the time Tavren stepped into the forest beyond, dawn had begun to bloom over the peaks. The first golden light touched his face, and for the first time in decades, he felt it: hope. The hunt had begun again. But so had something far older. The world, though broken and blind, would remember its balance. Tavren Wolfveil, last alpha of a cursed bloodline, lifted his gaze to the rising sun and walked toward it. There's a clearing up ahead by the creek, Tavren said, his voice steady but low. We'll rest there for a bit. Nira nodded, following him until the trees opened to reveal a quiet glade where mountain water shimmered over smooth stones. She knelt beside the stream, cupping the icy water in her palms, while Tavren settled on a fallen log nearby, scanning the forest with an alpha's instinctive vigilance. After a long silence, she finally spoke. He mattered to you, Kyle. Tavren's weathered face barely changed, but his eyes flickered with something old pain carved deep by time. I found him when he was 8, he said slowly. Hunters had slaughtered his parents. I found him hiding in a root cellar, covered in their blood, too scared to speak. The memory tightened his chest like a vice. No pack would take him in, a broken cub, without lineage. So I did. I taught him everything I knew about our ways. Raised him as the son I never had. Until the curse, Nira finished softly. Tavren nodded. The crimson veil, he said. I felt it building inside me, the same hunger for dominance that consumed every Wolfveil alpha before me. I'd already been forced to kill my brother Koran when it took him. I couldn't risk Kyle or anyone. So you left, she murmured. In the middle of the night, he admitted, his voice rough. No goodbye. I thought disappearing would hurt less. I arranged for him to join a stable pack, strong, alpha, solid traditions. I thought he'd understand one day. Nira finished drinking and sat beside him, close enough for him to feel the quiet steadiness that radiated from her. It was the Omega gift, the calm that balanced the storm within alphas. Instead, he came to hate what you stood for, she said gently. The old ways, the traditions that left him behind. And now he hunts the last Moon Omega. Tavren turned to study her. You still haven't told me why you came to find me specifically. There are other alphas who remember the old ways, others who might protect you. None with your blood, Nira replied without hesitation. None who've carried the crimson veil and survived it. He gave a humorless chuckle. Survived. More like endured. 20 years of watching every breath, every thought. Yet you haven't fallen, she said, leaning forward, eyes shining. Most cursed alphas lose themselves within months. You lasted decades. The prophecy spoke of one like you, an alpha who walks between worlds, who carries the curse, but is not consumed by it. He joins with the last moon Omega to restore the balance that was broken. Tavren's head snapped toward her. What prophecy? Instead of answering, Nira opened her pack and drew out a small leather pouch. Inside was a fragile fragment of parchment, sealed in glass. My grandmother guarded this her entire life, she said reverently. It's the last page from the book of the Lunaris Order, thought destroyed during the Great Purge. Tavren accepted it with careful hands. The writing shimmered faintly, old glyphs, only few could still read. His brow furrowed as he translated, the air growing heavier around them. When the blood moon rises for the third time, he read slowly, the last Wolfveil Alpha and the final moon Omega shall stand at the convergence. Together they will either restore the balance or fall into eternal darkness. He looked up sharply. This is why Kale hunts you. He knows. He does, Nira confirmed. The New Moon Council has been erasing anyone tied to the prophecies. My family's hidden for generations and was passing this secret down. But when my grandmother died last year, something awakened in the bloodlines. They felt it and began the hunt again. Tavren placed the fragile fragment back into her hands with quiet reverence. The convergence. It refers to an astronomical alignment. 3 moons crossing once every century. The last was 90 years ago. And the next, 2 weeks from now, Nira whispered. The night of the 3rd blood moon. The weight of her words pressed on Tavren like stone. After 20 years of silence and solitude, fate had come knocking again, dragging him back into a destiny he had tried so hard to bury. Tavren rose from the fallen log, the sound of the creek fading beneath his words. We keep moving. There's an old wolf settlement, 10 miles east, wolves who still honor the ancient ways. They might shelter us until we decide what comes next. Nira followed without hesitation. There was something in her silence, a trust that both steadied and unnerved him. Trust meant responsibility, and that burden had nearly broken him once before. They trekked through the wilderness, Tavren setting a firm but mindful pace. He adjusted to her steps without realizing it slowing, when fatigue crept into her breath, steering them through softer trails. Their movements began to sync naturally, Alpha and Omega, moving in unspoken rhythm, a harmony lost to most of their kind. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge, overlooking a quiet valley. Smoke drifted from stone chimneys, and the scent of aged wolves hung in the crisp air. Silver Creek, Tavren murmured, a haven for those who couldn't bend to the new order. Some of them once served under you, Nira said softly. Will they welcome you back? He hesitated. Eyes shadowed. I left them too. But they understand the curse better than most. They'll listen before they judge. As twilight painted the mountains in amber and violet, they descended into the valley. The settlement held barely 20 cabins arranged in a loose circle around a fire pit. No power lines, no engines, no sign of the human world. Only woodstone and silence. Their arrival stirred movement. 3 elders approached from the center of the village, weathered, proud and strong despite their years. The woman leading them carried silver hair braided down her back, her gaze sharp as winter sunlight. Tavren Wolfveil, she said, her voice steady but weary. We thought you long dead. Death would have been easier, Maven. He replied with a faint nod. She smirked faintly. Still dramatic, I see. Her attention shifted to Nira. An Omega, she said, nostrils flaring slightly. And not just any. You carry old blood. Nira Ashvale Tavren introduced. Descendant of the moon, Omega. Megaline. We seek refuge only for the night. Maven studied them a moment longer, then inclined her head. Come. The cold deepens, and your story deserves fire and quiet. The largest cabin greeted them with warmth. The walls were lined with relics of the old world books, charms, carved totems that hummed faintly with energy. A fire burned low in the hearth shadows, dancing across the faces of two others already waiting inside. Ronan Tavren greeted the broad-shouldered man whose white beard caught the firelight, once his second in command. And beside him, Seren, thin and keen-eyed, the settlement's healer. They sat the tea, strong enough to bite. Tavren spoke of everything Nira's arrival. Kael's assault, the prophecy, the fragment of the Lunaris order. When he finished, silence stretched heavy in the room. Ronan's deep voice broke it. Kael Stormfang, the cub you raised has turned tyrant. You should have seen it coming. Tavren's jaw tightened. His heart wasn't always corrupted. He believed he could save our kind. His path twisted, but it began with hope. Seren's voice was soft but carried weight. Good intentions often light the road to ruin. The question is, what will you do? Do now. Tavren glanced at Nira. She met his eyes without fear. The prophecy says we must reach the convergence, he said. But it doesn't tell us how to restore the balance, or what waits there. Maven exchanged looks with the other elders. The fragment you hold may not be the whole truth, she said carefully. We've kept what others destroyed, the book of the Lunaris. Order may be gone, but its wisdom survives in memory. The physical book was lost, Ronan added, but its words were passed down. Through us. The fire crackled its glow, deepening across their faces. The past, it seemed, had not been buried completely. The knowledge had survived through memory carried in whispers when books burned and stones were shattered. Hope flickered in Nira's eyes. You know the rest of the prophecy, Maven shook her head slowly. Not I, but there's one among us who still remembers. Elder Alera, she was the last memory keeper of the Lunaris order before its fall. Her body is frail, her mind wanders. But when dawn comes, her memory clears like mist burning off the river. Then we must speak with her, Tavren said, rising. Seren lifted a hand in quiet warning. She sees no one before sunrise. The dawn light is sacred to her, she says. It guides true remembering. You'll have your audience tomorrow. Though impatience tugged at him, Tavren inclined his head. He'd learned long ago that wisdom couldn't be rushed. Knowledge like that of the Silver Hollow demanded reverence, not urgency. Then we accept your hospitality until morning, he said, voice formal but sincere. Maven smiled faintly. You still remember the old courtesies for a man who spent decades in exile. The elders led them to a small guest cabin, simple yet carefully tended. 2 sleeping chambers divided by a narrow hearth, clean linens, and the faint scent of cedar and smoke. As they walked through the village, Tavren felt eyes following them. Wolves peering through cracked shutters and half-open doors. The looks were wary, but not cruel. Some held remembrance, others doubt. They remembered him, their alpha, once their protector. Some had lost faith when he vanished. Others had grieved him as dead. Now he returned with a legend at his side, a moon Omega thought extinct. When they were alone, Nira sank into a wooden chair, exhaustion softening her posture. They still respect you, she murmured, even after everything. Tavren stood by the window, the glow of lanterns reflecting in his eyes. They understand sacrifice, he said quietly. Many lost their kin during the Great Purge. They know what it costs to survive, and what it means to walk away to protect those you love, like leaving your pack and Kael. He turned his gaze, sharpening. You speak boldly to an alpha you barely know. An alpha who hasn't demanded submission in 20 years, she countered, meeting his stare. And one who carries a burden I'm bound to share if the prophecy's right. Before he could reply, a soft knock came. A young wolf left trays of food at their door, hot stew bread, and preserved fruit. They ate in silence, the warmth of the meal grounding them after days of cold and fear. When they'd finished, Nira spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. What did it feel like? When the curse began, Tavren's hands stilled around his cup. For a long moment the fire's crackle was the only sound. When he finally spoke, his tone was distant, his words carved from memory. It starts as anger. At first it feels righteous, protective even. But it grows. The wolf hungers for control, for dominance. You start to see challenge in every shadow, disobedience in every glance. The balance slips, and the beast takes more of you each day. He stared into the flames. My brother Corin Wolfthorn was 2 years ahead of me on that path. I watched him turn from a just alpha into a monster who ruled by fear. When he slaughtered 3 young wolves for disobedience, I knew he was gone. The man I loved as my brother was dead. Nira's voice softened. You ended it. I had to, Tavren said, voice low. If I hadn't, he would have torn apart the pack. And when I began to feel the same rage in my blood, I left before I became what I'd destroyed. She moved closer, the warmth of her presence easing the edge of his confession. But you did find a way to live with it. Control, he corrected, not peace. Every day is discipline, silence, meditation, isolation. It's survival, not victory. Yet you're still human, she said softly. When every alpha before you lost themselves, you held on. Tavren's eyes met hers, a glint of reluctant respect in their depths. The elders always said the moon omegas were created to temper the Wolfveil blood, to keep our kind from burning itself alive. Maybe that balance was the purpose of both our lines. And now Nira murmured the last of each stands together. Just in time for the convergence. Yes, Tavren said quietly, and the world will decide what we become. It's too perfect to be coincidence, Tavren muttered, tension edging his voice. Or maybe it's happening exactly as the prophecy said, Nira replied softly. Before he could answer, a sudden uproar erupted, outside the sound of alarmed voices and pounding footsteps. Tavren was at the door in an instant, Nira right behind him. The village square was chaos. Wolves in half-shifted forms filled the clearing, Hackle's raised eyes glowing in the lamplight. At the center stood Maven, facing a young man who looked half dead from his run. Mud-streaked, bloodied breath ragged. Tavren Maven called when she saw him. You need to hear this. He moved fast, recognizing the scout Kier, one of the few who still patrolled the ridges. What happened? Tavren demanded. Council forces. Kier gasped, clutching his side. 3 convoys headed up North Valley Road. Heavy guns tracking drones. They're hunting you. Bounties for anyone who gives you up. Death for anyone who doesn't. A growl rippled through the gathered wolves, not fear, but fury. These elders might have grown gray, but their fire hadn't faded. How long before they reach us? Tavren asked. Hours, Kier replied grimly. Not days. They're sweeping every outpost, every cabin. Kyle himself leads them. Maven straightened her voice, cutting through the night like a blade. Then they'll find the settlement ready. Silver Creek stands with you, Tavren. We haven't forgotten who protected us when the Crimson Veil began to spread, who chose exile over slaughter. Beside her, Ronan folded his massive arms, eyes burning. Let them come. Old wolves bite hardest when cornered. Their loyalty hit Tavren like a blow to the chest. No, he said firmly. I won't bring war to your door. This place has stayed hidden for decades. If Kyle finds it because of me, your people will pay the price. We don't abandon our own. Saren snapped, her small frame trembling with conviction. Nor do I. Tavren countered, his tone iron. That's why Nira and I will leave before dawn. The prophecy must be fulfilled, and that can't happen if we're captured or dead. Maven studied him, eyes sharp as frost. You've changed, Tavren. The Alpha who left us 20 years ago, would have stood and fought even against fate itself. And that Alpha, he said quietly, was one step away from losing himself to the curse. Learning when not to fight was the hardest lesson I ever learned. A murmur spread among the wolves' approval, from the old, frustration from the young. The legend of the warrior Alpha was one thing. The man before them was something different, measured, tempered, human. What about Elder Alera? Nira asked suddenly, worry creeping into her voice. We still need what she knows, the full prophecy. Maven nodded. Then we go now. The night's half gone, and dawn may bring blood before light. The crowd broke apart. Some wolves began packing supplies. Others checked old silver-forged weapons that hadn't seen daylight in generations. Despite Tavren's command to leave, the village was preparing for battle. Maven led Tavren and Nira up a narrow trail toward a small, secluded cabin, nearly swallowed by towering pines. It was ancient, its logs darkened by centuries of rain and sun, its roof patched and repatched until only memory held it together. The Memory Keeper's home, Maven whispered reverently. It stood for 3 centuries. Elder Alera is the 27th keeper since our founding. She knocked 3 times, 2 quick, 1 slow. The door creaked open to reveal a woman who looked older than time itself. Her silver-white hair spilled over her stooped shoulders, her face creased with lines deep as rivers. Yet her amber eyes shone clear, burning with uncanny awareness. I've been expecting you, Alera said, her voice surprisingly strong. The Wolfveil, Alpha and the Moon. Omega. The prophecy walks again tonight. Maven bowed her head. Forgive our intrusion, Elder. The hour is late, but urgency drives us. Alera chuckled softly. Time is a toy of the young. Come in, children. The past has been waiting for you. Inside, Tavren felt the air change. The cabin was a living archive, its wooden walls etched with intricate burned symbols, spirals and runes that pulsed faintly under the firelight. The air carried the scent of sage parchment and old magic. Elder Alera settled into a carved rocking chair, the wood marked with the same patterns that covered the walls. Her gaze fixed on Nira. The fragment you carry, she said, voice dropping to a whisper. It tells only the beginning. A prophecy without direction is only a weight on the soul. Elder Alera murmured, her voice echoing like wind through stone. You seek the full text. It wasn't a question yet, Nira nodded anyway. We need to understand what must be done when the convergence comes. The old woman closed her eyes, tilting her head as if listening to voices no one else could hear. When she spoke again, her tone changed, cadenced, almost musical, as if she were reciting words, older than language itself. When the blood moon rises for the 3rd time, the last Wolfveil Alpha and the final moon Omega shall stand at the convergence. Together, they shall either mend the broken balance or fall into eternal shadow. She drew a deep breath, her frail frame trembling slightly, before she continued. The Alpha must yield what was never meant to be possessed, the dominion that devours all it touches. The Omega must reclaim what was stolen, the harmony that tempers strength with wisdom. At the sacred ground where the first covenant was sealed, blood shall answer blood, and bond shall answer bond. What pride shattered shall be healed through sacrifice. What power broke shall be mended by choice. When her eyes opened again, the amber within them gleamed with threads of gold. 3 trials await the convergence, she said. The trial of memory, where past sins must be faced. The trial of blood, where one must embrace the beast without surrender. And the trial of spirit, where sacrifice must be given freely without fear. Tavren's brows furrowed. The prophecy speaks of a sacred site, the Moon Temple, but it was destroyed centuries ago during this great purge. Alera's lips curved into a knowing smile. Stone crumbles. Power does not. The temple still stands where it always has hidden, from those unworthy of its purpose. Where Nira asked, leaning forward. At the meeting of 3 valleys, Alera replied. Where the earth forms a perfect circle of standing stones. Where moonlight pools like silver water on the longest night. Her eyes turned to Tavren. You know it, Alpha. Your blood remembers even if your mind does not. Something stirred deep in Tavren's memory, a vision of his father leading him through mountain mist to a valley encircled by ancient stones. The memory was hazy, almost dreamlike. The silver hollow, he said slowly. My father brought me there once. He said it was where the Wolfveil alphas communed with the moon. Alara nodded, her expression almost proud. Yes. The outer temple fell to fire, but the inner sanctum endures. That is where the convergence must take place. And the trials Nira pressed. How do we prepare for them? The elder's eyes softened. Some trials cannot be rehearsed, only met with truth in one's heart. But understand this, the curse that has haunted the Wolfveil line is not a punishment. It is the echo of imbalance. She reached out with hands knotted like tree roots, and took both of theirs, pressing them together. The moment their palms met, energy rippled through the air, a hum that raised the hairs on Tavren's arms. Alpha and Omega, Alara whispered. Power and peace. Strength and wisdom. Long ago, the first Wolfveil severed what was meant to be, eternal, rejecting the moon. Omega bound to him, choosing domination over balance. Since then, every generation has paid the price. A spark of heat pulsed between Tavren and Nira's joined hands. Their eyes met, breath catching in unison. Something ancient stirred something that recognized itself. The bond, Nira whispered. The Alpha-Omega bond that was broken. Not broken, Alara corrected softly. Corrupted. Twisted into dominance without compassion. What you call the Crimson Veil. Tavren pulled back, unease flickering through his eyes. You're saying the only way to break this curse is to restore the bond, to tie myself to an Omega I barely know. Not suggesting, Alpha, Alara said firmly, declaring. But such a bond cannot be forced. It must be chosen freely. Both must understand what they surrender and what they gain. And if we refuse, Tavren asked, though his voice betrayed that he already knew, then the convergence will still come. The power will still awaken. But without the bond's balance, it will devour you both and everything for 100 miles around. Her tone turned grave. The last time an unbonded alpha faced the convergence, the desert they called Death Valley was born. Silence blanketed the cabin. Outside, the faint sounds of wolves readying for battle seemed distant, insignificant beside the enormity of what had just been spoken. Finally, Maven's voice broke the stillness, quiet yet resolute. Dawn is close, she said, and with it Kael Stormfang's forces. Whatever choice you make, Elder, Alara said softly, it cannot be made within these walls. Her gaze flicked to the door to the horizon beyond. Go to the Silver Hollow. In that place of power, the truth will reveal itself. The bond will find you, just as it was always meant to. Tavren rose slowly, thoughts racing like wildfire. Thank you, Elder. Your guidance gives us purpose, if not comfort. The ancient woman smiled, mischief glinting in her gold-flecked eyes, a flash of the girl she once was. Comfort is for humans, Wolf. Our kind was forged for the wild path, the moonlit road that tests the soul. Embrace it. As Nira turned to leave, Alara caught her hand, the old fingers trembling yet fierce with intent. Child of the moon, she whispered. Remember, this balance must be chosen, not forced. An alpha who is made to yield remains a slave to power, only beneath a different master. The circle must be completed by will, not submission. Nira nodded, her voice barely above a breath. I understand. Outside the settlement was alive, though dawn was still distant. Packs of wolves moved with purpose. Supplies gathered. Weapons distributed, escape routes charted for the young and the wounded. The air vibrated with restrained tension. Ronan approached, towering and broad-shouldered, his silhouette framed by the dim, lightning-streaked horizon. He carried 2 knapsacks over his shoulder. We've packed what you'll need, 3 days' food, medical kits, and maps with safe trails through the high ridges. Tavren clasped his old friend's arm. "Thank you, brother. Keep our people safe." Ronan's brow lifted slightly at the word "our." After so many years of exile, Tavren still claimed the pack as his own. "We'll stall the council for as long as we can," Ronan vowed. "They'll never find this place." Maven joined them, younger wolves in tow, carrying bundles of supplies. Her tone was quiet, urgent. "Alara gave us another warning," she said. "Kale isn't acting alone. Something older moves behind him, something tied to the first breaking of the bond." Tavren's expression darkened. "Varen Bloodshade. My grandfather's spirit never left this world. I felt him especially when the crimson veil presses hardest." Maven's eyes narrowed. "Then tread carefully. The dead who refuse to rest carry grudges deeper than mountains." As the first gold streaks of dawn bled across the peaks, Tavren and Nira stood ready to depart. The entire settlement gathered, forming a solemn ring around them, old wolves and young alike, a circle of loyalty and silent promise. "The path to the Silver Hollow won't be kind," Tavren warned. 3 days through the highest range snow cliffs, and no mercy from the land." "I never asked for mercy," Nira replied softly, "only meaning." Maven stepped forward, offering a small leather pouch. Inside, a bone amulet glimmered, faintly carved with ancient runes. "A talisman," she said, "forged by the last Lunaris order before its fall. It won't shield you from blade or bullet, but it will ward off darker things." Tavren accepted it with reverence, pressing the charm briefly to his forehead before slipping it over his neck. "May the moon guide your path until we return," he declared formally. "And may your bond restore what was broken," the wolves answered in unison. As sunlight broke across the ridge, Tavren and Nira began their ascent westward toward the peaks of the Sierra Nevada, leaving behind the only safe haven left in their world. Behind them, the elders braced for war, ready to stand between the council's armies and the fragile hope that still flickered in their bloodline. Ahead waited the Silver Hollow, the Convergence, and a choice that would decide not only their fate but that of all who bore the ancient wolf spirit. Far above, unseen by mortal eyes, the restless spirit of Varen Bloodshade watched from the veil, between worlds cold, eager, waiting for the moment power would rise again, unchained by balance. And at the heart of the mountains, the Silver Hollow endured an ancient sentinel of stone and silence. Massive granite monoliths reached toward the sky, their surfaces carved with fading sigils, glowing faintly beneath the dying moonlight. Nestled in a natural amphitheater where 3 valleys met, the place breathed an air of sacred stillness. Tavren paused at the edge, his breath visible in the thin, icy air. 3 days of brutal travel had brought them here through ravines, carved by forgotten glaciers, over sheer cliffs, slick with frost, past forests so old they seemed alive. Behind him, Nira stood in silence. The journey had stripped away every trace of the sheltered Omega she once was. Her face was leaner now, her gaze steady, no longer just beautiful, but resolute. Her eyes, once soft, now burned with quiet purpose, and the strength of one who had faced the wild and found herself within it. "We made it," Nira whispered, her voice nearly lost beneath the restless wind weaving through the stone pillars. Tavren lifted his gaze toward the horizon, where twilight bled across the clouds in streaks of crimson and molten gold. "Just in time," he said quietly. "The convergence begins tonight." They stepped into the Silver Hollow with reverence, each movement slow, deliberate. The air itself felt heavier here, thick with power, humming with old magic that thrummed through the ground like a buried heartbeat. Even a human would have felt at the edge of 2 worlds brushing against each other. At the center stood the altar, a single slab of black granite, impossibly smooth, untouched by tools, shaped by the hand of nature or something far older. Etched across its surface, barely visible in the fading light, spiraled markings shimmered like veins of silver beneath the stone. Tavren ran his roughened fingers along them. Elder Alera was right, he murmured. This place hasn't been tainted. The power sleeps, but it's still alive. Nira moved around the altar slowly, eyes wide with awe. It's strange, she said. I feel like I've stood here before, though I know I haven't. Blood memory, Tavren replied. The Moon Omegas once guarded this place before the Great Purge. Your ancestors stood where you stand now, keepers of balance and light. She finished her circle and stopped beside him. And the Wolfveils, she asked softly. What was your family's role, guardians? He said, nodding toward the ring of towering stones. The Alpha's strength kept harm from the Omega during the rites. In return, the Omega's presence kept the Alpha from being consumed by his own hunger for power. Balance, Nira whispered. Not dominance. Not submission partnership. Like Elder Alera said. Tavren's eyes grew distant, heavy with the weight of memory. The sin of my bloodline wasn't pride, he said. It was rejection of that balance. Varen Bloodshade, the first of our line, cursed by the Crimson Veil, believed Alpha power should reign alone without Omega restraint. He broke the sacred bond, and every Wolfveil since has carried that burden. Until you, Nira said quietly, studying him with new understanding. The Alpha who chose exile over tyranny. The one who's resisted the curse longer than any before you. I haven't defeated it, Tavren said, shadows flickering in his eyes. Only delayed it. Even now it stirs. Stronger in this place. Then we stay focused, Nira said firmly, stepping closer. Her nearness radiated a calming energy, her Omega essence weaving subtly through the air, tempering the wild surge beneath his skin. We prepare. The convergence won't begin until moonrise. Without another word, they began setting camp along the circle's edge, careful not to disturb the ancient stones. Years in exile had made Tavren efficient, his movements instinctive, constructing shelter, positioning stones, to reflect heat, keeping the sacred space untouched. Nira followed every instruction without hesitation, gathering wood, arranging bedding, her hands steady and capable. As they worked, Tavren found himself watching her more often than he intended. Most young wolves he'd known were restless, power-hungry, and impatient. Nira was different. She moved with quiet resolve, her confidence understated, yet unshakable. Your grandmother trained you well, he said as she skinned a rabbit he'd caught earlier. Most wolves these days wouldn't know where to start. A faint smile curved her lips. She used to say, depending too much on human comforts makes us forget who we are. She believed in keeping our instincts alive. She glanced up briefly, meeting his gaze. She would have liked you. She always spoke of the old Alphas with respect, especially your family. Before we became monsters, Tavren said bitterly. Nira's head snapped up. You're not a monster, she said firmly. You never were. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat too long. In her expression, Tavren saw something deeper than pity recognition. A reflection of the same wound, the same defiance against fate. It rattled him in a way few things could. He broke the gaze first. We should finish setting up, he muttered. There's work to do before moonrise. By the time darkness fell fully, their preparations were complete. The small fire crackled steadily, casting warmth against the cold mountain air. They ate sparingly, knowing the ritual ahead demanded clarity, body and mind, both cleansed. From his pack, Tavren drew a small leather pouch and unwrapped its contents, a mix of herbs and roots gathered on their journey. The faint scent of sage and night-blooming flowers filled the air. The old texts say these help sharpen the senses before the convergence, he said, grinding the brittle leaves between his fingers. Elder Alera would know the exact blend, but this should do. The flames flickered, throwing gold and shadow across their faces as the mountain wind sighed through the stones, ancient, watchful, and waiting. He blended the herbs with water heated over the fire, the aroma sharp and earthy rising in curling wisps into the cool night air. Handing a steaming cup to Nira, Tavren lifted his own in a silent toast before sipping. The bitterness cut through the warmth, carrying traces of forest stone and something older, an echo of ancient power. Nira followed his lead, eyes closed, letting the infusion course through her veins. "I can feel it," she whispered. "Everything feels sharper, more alive." Tavren nodded, sharing the heightened awareness. The stones beneath them seemed to pulse subtly, patterns visible only to a sense deeper than sight. The wind threading between the monoliths carried rhythm, almost like words spoken in a language just beyond comprehension. "It begins," he murmured, rising. Above them, the sky had darkened to velvet stars, piercing the black like scattered diamonds. Yet it was the eastern horizon that demanded their awe. The first blood moon, enormous and crimson as fresh spilled blood, climbing slowly over the peaks, bathing the mountains in its unearthly light. The first of three, Nira breathed, recalling the prophecy. Even for Tavren, who had seen countless moons rise in the wilds, this was unlike anything else. The enormity, the red glow, the raw power resonating through the earth. As moonlight touched the circle, the ancient carvings on the stones began to shimmer with a soft silver glow, linking each monolith in a network of light. The air itself vibrated fluid and pliant, charged with anticipation. "It's time," Tavren said, voice thick with an emotion he could not name, fear and awe intertwining. After decades of fleeing his legacy, he now stood at the apex of the line his ancestors had built, for better or worse. They stepped to the edge of the circle, the boundary between the mundane and the sacred, tangible on their skin, like standing on the edge of a river, rushing unseen beneath ice. "The trial of memory," Nira murmured, recalling Alera's words. "Past sins must be faced." Tavren drew a slow, grounding breath, centering himself. "I am Tavren Wolfveil," he declared, voice carrying over the quiet night. "Last alpha of the Wolfveil line. I acknowledge the failures of my ancestors and my own." The boundary rippled slightly, neither accepting nor rejecting his words. Varen Bloodshade broke the sacred bond, he continued, voice rough with emotion. "He chose dominance over balance. Every Wolfveil since has carried the weight of that choice, bringing ruin to those we were meant to protect." His jaw tightened. "I abandoned my pack rather than risk their lives when the curse manifested in me. I left a boy who trusted me. I chose isolation over duty." The boundary pulsed again, acknowledgement flickering but incomplete. Nira stepped close, steady and calm. "I am Nira Ashvale, last of the moon. Omega line," she said softly. "Our ancestors failed to maintain balance." She continued, eyes meeting his. "We retreated when we should have confronted. We hid when we should have stood firm. We chose safety over purpose." A shimmer of light pulsed across the circle, acknowledgement, yet not full acceptance. A silent understanding passed between them. In unison, they spoke the next words. "We stand now to restore what was broken, to acknowledge the past without being bound by it, to forge a new covenant of choice, not obligation." The boundary shimmered and parted, revealing the entrance to the circle, a passage from the ordinary world into a realm of ancient power. Hand in hand, they stepped across the threshold. The moment their feet touched the sacred ground, the ordinary world receded. Details sharpened colors, deepened sounds intensified. The blood moon hung overhead, spotlighting the central altar. Shadows gathered at the edges, sentient and watching. From those shadows a figure coalesced, tall, imposing features, reminiscent of Tavren, but twisted by centuries of rage and ambition. Varen Bloodshade, first cursed alpha of the line, bound to this place by the very covenant he had violated. The last pitiful remnants of once great bloodlines, the apparition intoned, voice grinding like stone. "You come seeking salvation." Its amber eyes blazed, locked on Tavren, a judgment older than time itself. "My disappointing descendant, hiding in the mountains instead of embracing your true self," the spirit intoned, looming with malice. Tavren felt the crimson veil surge within him, the hunger, the pull of dominance, the primal urge to shift and rend coursing through his veins. He clenched his fists, grounding himself with years of discipline, trembling with the effort. "We've come to repair what you broke," he said, voice strained, but unwavering. "To restore the balance you rejected." A low, echoing laugh filled the sacred circle. "Balance is weakness," Tavren Bloodshade spat. "Power is strength. I freed our line from the shackles of Omega restraint and unlocked its true potential. You condemned your descendants to chaos and ruin." Nira stepped forward, her voice steady, fearless. "You twisted a sacred partnership into a curse that has brought only pain across centuries." The spirit expanded darkness, swirling like a living cloak. "The trial of memory isn't mere acknowledgement, fools," it hissed. "It is confrontation with truth. Witness the meaning of your precious balance." With a sweeping gesture, visions appeared in the air. Wolfveil alphas, through the ages mighty victorious, their packs expanding territories, crushing enemies, amassing wealth and power. "This is the legacy you scorn," Tavren snarled. "Alphas unmatched, shaping history through sheer will." Tavren watched the visions, eyes narrowing. Beyond the surface triumph, he saw the cost rage. Consuming blood, spilled packs, decimated bloodlines, severed lands abandoned. "I see it," he murmured. "I see what the curse has cost us, not just our sanity, but our purpose. Alphas exist to protect, not dominate, to lead with wisdom, not fear." He squared his shoulders, facing the spectral ancestor. "You didn't free our line, Tavren. You enslaved it to your pride. Every Wolfveil since has been chained to your broken ambition." The spirit roared its form, rippling with rage. "You dare judge me. You abandoned your duties at the first sign of awakening. You left the boy who trusted you." The form shifted briefly, taking the visage of a younger, Kyle Stormfang, eyes blazing with grief and betrayal. Years of perspective tempered Tavren's anger. He saw past the manipulation, beyond the fear driving it. "No," he said, voice clear and unwavering. "You never embraced your true nature. You rejected half of it. Strength is instinct, yes, but also protection, loyalty and balance." Nira stepped closer, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined naturally, the subtle bond stabilizing the circle. "The wolf's true nature is balance," she said softly. "Strength guided by compassion, power tempered by wisdom, Alpha and Omega united." The spectral form of Tavren flickered, destabilized by their resolve, a trace of uncertainty, perhaps even fear, crossing its ancient visage. "The trial of memory isn't about your judgment," Tavren continued, power swelling in his voice. "It's about understanding the past. We acknowledge the sins, the broken covenant, but also the possibility of restoration." The spirit howled a primordial scream that shook the stones. "You understand nothing. The power I unleashed cannot be contained. The curse is our true nature, freed from restraint." "No," Tavren replied with absolute conviction. "Our true nature was always meant to include both aspects. The curse is imbalance, given form, not the essence of our line." Above them, the blood moon pulsed. A crimson shaft of light struck the central altar. Ancient carvings ignited with soft silver light, shifting and flowing, transforming the dormant patterns into living, breathing script that twisted and shimmered with newfound life. Tavren Bloodshade's spectral form recoiled from the glowing altar, shrinking back into the shadows that fringed the circle. "This change means nothing," he growled. "The trial of blood comes next. Let us see how steadfast you remain when the wolf demands release." With that, the apparition dissipated into mist, leaving Tavren Wolfveil and Nira Ashveil alone with the activated altar. The stone now radiated power, a palpable pressure pressing against their skin, urging them forward. "We passed the first trial," Nira whispered, awe in her voice. We face the past without being consumed. Tavren's face remained solemn. The trial of blood will be harder. It tests the essence of what we are, not what we've done. As if on cue, a second blood moon rose, joining the first two massive crimson orbs in the sky, casting ruby light over the circle. The altar's pull intensified, insistent, irresistible. Hand in hand, they approached with caution. Symbols etched into the altar now appeared clear. One side, a stylized wolf head, raised in alpha dominance, the other a crescent moon embracing a lowered wolf, the mark of Omega. Between them, a spiral represented the bond that once harmonized the two aspects, the trial of blood. Nira murmured, "True nature must be embraced without surrender." Tavren released her hand, taking position at the alpha side. Nira stood opposite him, the stone vibrating with accumulated power. "Blood calls to blood," he intoned, recalling the ritual from texts studied long ago. "Nature calls to nature. What flows within must be honored." He extended one hand, palm open, while the other manifested claws, not a full shift but a controlled channeling of his wolf aspect. With a single precise motion, he drew a shallow cut across his palm, blood spilling onto the altar. Nira mirrored him, tentative but guided by instinct. Her blood joined his, the stone consuming the liquid eagerly, symbols igniting with inner fire. The circle resonated. A harmonic vibration felt deep in body and soul. Boundaries between human and wolf blurred. The wolf rises. Tavren warned, feeling the controlled transformation begin. Unlike curse-driven shifts of the past, this was natural, fluid, a return to essential nature. Nira's eyes glowed with the silver light of an Omega in transition. "Let it come," she said, serene. The change swept through them, both seamless and controlled. Bones realigned, muscles reshaped, senses sharpened. No rage, no bloodlust, only clarity. Standing across the altar in wolf form, Tavren bore the silver-gray alpha markings of his prime. Nira mirrored him as a moon Omega. Thoughts, emotions, and memories flowed between them through long dormant channels, the wolf aspect now fully integrated with their human selves. They were not beasts, but extensions of their true selves. Power tempered by wisdom, not consumed by fury. A ghostly echo of Varen's presence whispered through the circle. "The wolf demands dominance. Accept your true nature. Descendant, take what is yours by right." But in wolf form, Nira stood equal, not subordinate. The old hierarchy of dominance and submission, Varen's legacy, was exposed as a distortion of a deeper, more complex bond. Together they raised their heads toward the twin blood moons and howled, not in challenge, not in dominance, but in perfect harmony. Their voices intertwined with the ancient stones echoing across the mountains, a declaration that balance was restored and the covenant renewed. The altar between them pulsed with energy, the spiral at its center beginning to rotate slowly at first, then faster, drawing power from their combined presence. Not Alpha alone, not Omega alone, but the two in true harmony. Varen Bloodshade's spectral form flickered, growing fainter with each passing moment. "This proves nothing," the voice insisted faintly. "The final trial remains. Sacrifice awaits you both." The howl faded, its last notes hanging in the air like tangible waves of potential. Tavren Wolfveil and Nira Ashveil regarded one another across the altar, communicating silently, understanding, respect, and something deeper than either had anticipated. The wolfish energy receded as naturally as it had surged, leaving them once more in human form, though traces of their wolf selves lingered in amber eyes for Tavren and silver for Nira. "We are more complete," Nira murmured, her voice carrying the lingering resonance of the transformation. "We faced the truth and embraced it without surrendering." Tavren nodded, feeling something he had not in decades, the curse that had haunted him now a distant shadow. Protective strength replaced domineering instinct. "The final trial approaches," he said, eyes rising to the third blood moon, which now joined its companions in the sky. the trial of spirit, where sacrifice must be freely given, not born of fear. The 3 blood moons formed a perfect crimson triangle above, pressing down on the circle with tangible force. The air thickened reality, bending under the alignment of cosmic power. The altar throbbed with accumulated energy, the spiral spinning so fast it appeared solid. Varen made one last attempt to assert his presence, wavering at the edge of the circle. "You cannot succeed," he insisted, voice thin and distant. "The sacrifice required is too great. One of you must fall for the other to claim the convergence's power." But they understood better now the manipulations that had seemed convincing at the start of the ritual were only desperate attempts to maintain a broken order, to prevent the restoration of balance that would end Varen's influence forever. "The sacrifices are not of life," Tavren said with certainty, born of newly awakened knowledge. "They are of illusion, the lies we've carried for generations." Nira nodded in agreement. Alpha and Omega, not ruler, and subject, but equal parts of a greater whole, surrendering the false comforts of assigned roles to embrace partnership. They placed their hands on the altar again, palms down, feeling the stone vibrate beneath them. The spiral spun faster, creating a vortex that pulled at something deep within them both. "I, Tavren Wolfveil, surrender the illusion of solitary strength," he declared. "True power comes from connection, not domination. I release the false pride that has bound my line to repeated mistakes. I, Nira Ashvale, surrender the illusion of passive acceptance," she replied. "True wisdom comes from engagement, not withdrawal. I release the false humility that restrained my line from its proper role." The vortex drew from them, not life force, not physical strength, but the accumulated weight of generations, burdens imposed by broken covenants rather than nature. Varen howled in denial, his form dissolving as centuries of distorted alpha power collapsed, replaced by something corrected, compassionate, restrained by understanding rather than domination. "Transformed. Released from the prison you created when you rejected balance," Tavren whispered, feeling the weight of centuries lift. "Your vigil ends here." The energy peaked, spiraling outward, to encompass the altar, then the circle, and beyond a wave of balancing force, rippling across the land, restoring harmony wherever it touched. In that moment, as cosmic alignment reached perfection, Tavren Wolfveil and Nira Ashvale experienced transcendence, not just of hand or mind, but of essential nature, Alpha and Omega, flowing together, strength and wisdom intertwined. No longer a bond of domination and submission, as Varen had perverted it, but one of mutual completion. The convergence held for a timeless instant, 3 blood moons aligned. 3 trials completed, centuries of imbalance corrected. Gradually, cosmic forces ebbed, the moons continuing across the night sky, the energy settling into a steady, sustainable flow rather than the overwhelming torrent they had just channeled. As the ritual's energy finally settled, Tavren Wolfveil and Nira Ashvale remained at the altar, hands joined across its ancient surface. The spiral etched into the stone glowed now with a calm, steady silver light, no longer thrashing with chaotic energy. Matching marks had appeared on their wrists, a spiral encircled by a ring, the ancient symbol of balanced union between Alpha and Omega. "It's done," Nira whispered, awe threading her voice. "The covenant is restored. The curse, it's broken." Tavren nodded, every fiber of his being resonating with the truth. The relentless struggle against rage and dominance that had shadowed his life for decades was gone, replaced by a steady strength, power tempered with wisdom, authority without tyranny. "Not just for us," he said, sensing the wider implications. "The balancing force will ripple outward, touching all wolves of the old bloodlines." The new moon. Council's artificial dominance will crumble as Omegas awaken to their true roles. Beyond the circle, dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The blood moons had completed their cosmic work, leaving only the simple majesty of a mountain sunrise, extraordinary enough in its own right. They exited the sacred space with ceremony, honoring the powers that had guided them, gratitude on their lips for the restoration of ancient balance. "What happens now?" Nira asked as they gathered their gear to descend from the heights. Tavren considered feeling new possibilities unfurl where before there had only been grim determination to survive day by day. "Marcus will sense the change," he said. "All the old bloodlines will feel it too, though they may not understand it yet. He'll resist, but he'll have to reckon with it." A brief shadow of concern crossed Nira's face, but Tavren shouldered his pack with the effortless strength of a man decades younger. The bond they had forged had rejuvenated them both in ways neither had expected. "The balanced bond is stronger than any borrowed authority," he said. "The new Moon Council thrived on artificial power. Marcus will have to reconsider his path." They began their descent, moving with the confidence of those certain of their purpose. The forest welcomed them with morning's symphony birdsong, rustling leaves, and distant calls of awakening creatures. The world felt sharper, more alive, as if the restored Alpha-Omega balance had attuned them to every detail. Tavren decided they would return first to Silver Hollow to ensure the elders' safety. Then perhaps they could build anew, not the isolated packs of old, nor the rigid hierarchies Marcus had imposed, but a community founded on genuine partnership among all aspects of wolf nature. Nira smiled, her hand finding his, as they walked, imagining a sanctuary for those still learning the true balance, a place where this knowledge would never be lost again. Ravencroft Sanctuary. Tavren said, testing the name aloud. It felt right. Not ruled by an alpha, but guided by Alpha and Omega together. As they descended toward the valleys, leaving the sacred heights that had transformed them, Tavren reflected on the journey that had brought him here, 20 years of isolation, of battling his own nature instead of embracing it, years that once seemed wasted, now revealed as preparation for this moment of restoration. The road ahead would not be simple. Marcus and his loyalists would resist the changes rippling through wolf society. Human encroachment threatened traditional territories, and challenges awaited that would demand every ounce of wisdom and strength they possessed. Yet for the first time in generations, a Ravencroft Alpha walked in balance rather than conflict, guided by partnership rather than domination. The curse was broken, the covenant restored. Tavren Wolfveil had become something new, not diminished, not supreme, but complete in a way even his ancestors had never imagined. As the sun rose fully over the eastern peaks, spilling golden light across the land, Tavren and Nira continued their descent, Alpha and Omega moving in perfect harmony. Behind them, the Silver Hollow stood silent, its ancient stones waiting patiently for the next convergence, a century hence, for those who would understand the true meaning of balance.